Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. A very good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Mark Gibson, and I'm head of the Teagasc KT Outreach and Innovation Department. And I'm joined by Pat Murphy, who is head of the Teagasc Environment Knowledge Transfer Programme. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning.
And I'll introduce our other speakers in just a moment, but just to remind you that this series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network and Food Drink Ireland. So today we're going to speak about the Farm Zero project, which is a collaboration between BiOrbic, Carbery and others to create an economically viable climate neutral dairy farm. And to tell us more about the Zero C project, we're joined by Cian White, who's an ecologist with Trinity College Dublin, and Gavin Hunt, who is the project manager of the Farm Zero project. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the Signpost webinar. So I know you're going to tell us about the project itself in the presentation, but maybe you could just give us a little bit of background to your own background. Gavin, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, Mark, my name is Gavin Hunt, so I'm the project manager at the Farm Zero C. So I'm usually based in Shnock in West Cork. So I'm working with BiOrbic, which is a bioeconomy research centre, so based in UCD. So I'm actually working in the offices in UCD today, so I'm broadcasting from Dublin.
Very good. And the project is a collaboration with Carbery. For anybody who doesn't know who Carbery is, it's a major dairy co-op based in Ireland and across the globe, I suppose, at this stage. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And Cian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a PhD student, just about to finish up based in Trinity College Dublin. I'm in the botany department, and my supervisor is Jane Stout. So she does a lot of work on pollinators. She will have set up the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and she also has done a lot of work on natural capital accounting. So we're kind of bringing that kind of approach to Farm Zero C, doing a lot of habitat mapping, and then trying to build natural capital accounts at the farm scale on these intensive dairy farms to see if they can be integrated into the kind of farming management plans and system.
Great. Okay, so it's a holistic approach that the project is taking. Okay, so Gavin, I think you're going to start with the presentation, and so we've got two separate presentations. So we'll hand over to you, Gavin.
So I just want to start by giving a small bit of background to the project and why it was started. I suppose Irish dairy farmers are suffering from environmental and market pressures, with farmers bearing the brunt of the pressures on their sector. There has been a lot of media attention in the sector recently in relation to climate action bills and sectorial targets. So we're in a good starting position, as the carbon footprint of Irish milk is one of the lowest in the world. Speaking to farmers on the ground as part of the project, they understand change is needed and are keen to adopt new technologies to reduce their environmental footprint. The Farm Zero C project team are keen to help farmers achieve these goals. What's the project about? Farm Zero C is a collaboration between BiOrbic, Carbery and others to create an economically viable climate neutral dairy farm. The project presents a holistic approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase the health and resilience of the farm. We're aiming to achieve net zero emissions by 2027, but we also look at areas such as biodiversity, air quality and water quality. Farm Zero C will be a beacon for sustainable agriculture and provide a bright future for farmers and rural communities. Who are we collaborating with? So we're looking to collaborate with some fantastic people from different organisations. Kevin O'Connor from BiOrbic and in the Buckley from Carbery are leading the project. We have Jane Stout and Cian White from Trinity College Dublin, James Gaffey and Pat Doody from MTU, Fionnuala Murphy and Alejandro Vergara from UCD, Johan Sanders from Grassa, Lauren Shalou and Bridget Lynch from Teagasc. And we're also working with technology partners such as Carbon Space and Carbon Harvesters. Just to give a small bit of background on Shnock Farm, where the project is taking place, it is situated near Bandon in West Cork. So Shnock Farm is a working dairy farm, making about 250 cows in approximately 250 acres. It was set up in 2011 as part of the joint programme between Teagasc and Carbery, and is owned by the 4 West Cork co-ops, Bandon, Barrow, Drina and Lissavard. The aim of the joint programme is to demonstrate the design, setup and operation of a large-scale dairy unit and a grass-based system to provide information on the profitability and sustainability of this type of farming system. Shnock is a well-managed, profitable farm, which can be seen in the figures from 2020. So you're looking at a stocking rate of just about a cow to the acre. Grass grown in 2020 was about 13.23 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, utilising nearly 11 tonnes at 10.9. 6-week calving rate 91%, empty rate 9.2%, mean calving date on 19th of February producing just over 1,100 kgs of milk solids per hectare. So the focus of Schnock Farm has now pivoted as part of the project. We have 6 key pillars in the project. So animal diet and breeding, soil and soil carbon, renewable energy, biodiversity, clover multi-species swards, and life cycle analysis. Looking at the breakdown of our carbon footprint in the farm, about 63% is from animal digestion, 13% coming from manure storage, spreading and grazing, 17% coming from fertilizer use, 5% from forage and feed production, and about 2% from other sources. When we're talking about specific greenhouse gases, similar to all livestock systems, methane is our biggest concern, with about over half our carbon footprint coming from enteric fermentation, and methane from manure storage accounts for approximately 7% of our emissions. Nitrous oxide is the second largest contributor, with emissions coming from spreading fertilizer, slurry management, and grazing livestock. Carbon dioxide is the smallest contributor on the farm, with emissions coming from burning fossil fuels, electricity, and the production of concentrate and fertilizer. Looking at our life cycle analysis, our carbon footprint is displayed in terms of kgs or CO2 equivalents per kg of fat and protein corrected milk. So starting out in 2018, our carbon footprint was 0.95. In 2019, this was reduced to 0.87, and our most recent figure in 2020 is 0.78. So there's been a significant reduction in the carbon footprint since 2018. And if we're looking at the Teagasc models, the average Irish figure is just under 1. Most recent figures are 0.99 kgs of CO2 equivalent per kg of fat and protein corrected milk. So the farm is very efficient, which is credit to farm manager Kevin Ahern and 2IC Alan Murphy. How have we reduced our carbon footprint since 2018? So I'm just going to list some of the greenhouse gas mitigation measures that are implemented on the farm. We are incorporating clover into swards to reduce our chemical nitrogen usage. The aim is to reduce chemical in to an average of about 150 kgs per hectare. We were using low emission slurry spreading on the farm since 2020. So the LESS system is increasing the end fertilizer value of the slurry, allowing us to reduce total chemical in, and is also having an added benefit of reducing ammonia emissions up to 30%. We're using the economic breeding index to improve milk solids production, fertility and health, and to maximize profitability and environmental sustainability. The EBI of the Schnock herd is the top 5% nationally. We're using protected urea since 2020 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It has approximately about 71% lower nitrous oxide emissions compared to calcium ammonium nitrate can. Grassland management is excellent in the farm, averaging about 14 tonne of dry matter per hectare over the last number of years. And the target covers about 1,400 kgs of dry matter per hectare over the main grazing season and achieved 280 days of grass. A wind turbine was installed in Schnock in 2011 and supplies approximately 30% of the farm's energy requirements. This slide shows our holistic approach that we're taking. So what will we be doing as part of Farm Zero C? As I said, a holistic approach looking at animal and manure emissions, land, soil and import emissions, off-farm social and technological impact, and biodiversity strategies. We're looking at the diet to reduce methane production. So we're working very closely with Lawrence Slew and Moorpark to look at the grass press cake from the biorefinery, multi-species and methane reducing additives. We're aiming to improve animal health through improved management practices and using the EBI to improve the health sub-index of the herd. We're testing slurry amendments to reduce the greenhouse gas from stored slurry. We're also looking at quantifying emissions on the ground and also using satellite imagery. We plan to use stabilised slurry and also have a trial in place on the farm, approximately 0.4 a hectare, with biochar and seaweed to displace fertilizer use. So that's at the early stages. We're using clover and multi-species sward to reduce fertilizer use also. Approximately 10% of the farm is currently in the multi-species mix. We're using, as I mentioned, protected urea to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. We're also looking at alternative protein feeds and looking at ways to create an all-native concentrate to feed the cows in the parlour. We're looking at ways to increase soil carbon sequestration in the farm. Renewable energy is a key pillar in the project. So we're installing solar PV in the roof of the milking parlour to combine with the wind turbine that is already in place. We're also looking at using a grass protein concentrate from the grass biorefinery to reduce intensive import emissions in monogastric diets. Looking at off-farm, we're looking at the demand for climate traceable products. We're looking at developing an innovation blueprint, so a business plan to increase the resilience of farm. and looking at the biodiversity strategies, which Cian will go into in more detail later. So we're looking to increase biodiversity and the creation of a natural capital account. We're also looking at satellite imagery used for habitat mapping. So it's quite a complex site. It kind of just gives an overview of our holistic approach. As you can see from the bottom right, we're looking to achieve neutral or climate neutrality by 2027. There has been a lot of interest in the multi-species ward. So everybody that's visiting the farm wants to see the multi-species ward in action. So I've attached a couple of photos. The first photo on the left is just before the cows go into it. Middle photo, cows grazing it, and photo on the right is the post-grazing residue. So as you can see, there's no issue with cows grazing out, and they're grazing out tight. And approximately 10% of the farm is in this mixture as well. So it's a mixture of chicory, plantain, perennial ryegrass, white clover, and red clover. Soil carbon sequestration is getting a lot of attention in the media recently, so I just have a short slide explaining what we're doing in Teagasc. So we're monitoring and verifying soil carbon sequestration will take us further to prove negative emissions on the farm. Soil carbon sequestration is not part of the IPCC framework at the moment. So we need to prove what we're sequestering in Teagasc. So how we will measure sequestration, we need to analyse satellite data from Teagasc. We need to monitor soil carbon stocks through soil sampling. We need to quantify real-time greenhouse gas fluxes and meteorological variables using a sea-flux tower. So it's going to be quite difficult, and it will take time to verify the amount of carbon sequestered in the soil. So we have established a Teagasc baseline, and we now mitigate, sample, and sense so we can work towards certification of carbon sequestration on farms. Such an approach will also drive organic practices to increase the soil carbon sequestration rate. So just my last slide, just the conclusion. So we're placing the farm at the centre of the solution. So we're hoping to build the solution foundation that can be rolled out rapidly to farmers. The aim is to transform agriculture and provide a bright future for farmers and rural communities. We want to exceed EU targets for 2030 and 2050. And Farm Zero C will be a beacon for sustainable agriculture globally. I might just hand over to you now, Cian.
Thanks, Gavin. So we'll just get you set up there, Cian, and just remind everybody while Cian is setting up there that next week is Bioeconomy Week Ireland, and today's presentation and next week's presentation are part of the series of activities taking place as part of Bioeconomy Ireland Week. So we'll share some more details with you about that next week or after Cian's presentation. So Cian, we'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to talk much more about the kind of biodiversity piece of the project. Gavin's given an overview of the whole structure. There's a lot going on in the project, but I'm just going to talk specifically today about farmland habitat mapping and how that kind of fits in with what we're doing on the ground in Teagasc on our 10 replicator farms. There's also a natural capital piece to the work package I'm in. So we're trying to create natural capital accounts at the farm scale. I'm not going to talk about that today, but if you want more an idea of what natural capital is and how we might create natural capital accounts at the farm scale, my supervisor, Jane Stout, gave a presentation to this Signpost Series last year. So I'd recommend checking that out. And we've actually created accounts, probably by next year, maybe next year and a half. I can come back and talk about it probably then, but we haven't made a huge amount of progress on that yet. So today I'm going to talk about farmland habitat mapping. And I'm going to want to first of all give you context for kind of at the EU policy level, what's going on there. There's a lot of movement because there's this EU Green Deal has kind of come in the last year or two. And so with the EU Green Deal, there's a whole load of policies that are kind of coming in that are changing how farmland or kind of just biodiversity and kind of agri-environment schemes are changing at the European level. So this farm to fork strategy is integrating into the new CAP reform, and the EU biodiversity strategy is also integrating into this new CAP. So when each member state creates the new form of the CAP is that each member state has to create its own strategic plan, common agricultural strategic plan. So this means that Ireland is at the moment creating, the Department of Agriculture is creating its own common agricultural policy for Ireland, so specific to Ireland. But when they are creating that, they have to look at these EU level objectives. So the specific objectives around the CAP, but then there's these new EU Green Deal objectives that the Department of Agriculture have to look at and then integrate into their own strategic plan for Ireland. So these Green Deal objectives come from this farm to fork strategy and this EU biodiversity strategy. So just going to pull out a few of these targets here. This is not an exhaustive list, but just a few that will impact Irish agriculture. So they're looking for 25% of agricultural land to be organic. This is now across the EU. And then another one is reduce nutrients by 50%, reduce nutrient losses by 50%, and reduce overall fertilizer use by 20%. So we'll be looking at that in kind of the life cycle assessment analysis within the project. But as I'm the ecologist of the project, I'm more interested in this 10% agricultural area under high diversity landscape features. And so, that's when I talk to farmers about these new EU Green Deal targets, and specifically about this 10% habitat area, they ask me, why is this happening? That seems like quite an onerous task, especially if it's implemented at the farm scale. So I just want to give the background to why the EU biodiversity strategy has this 10% target, and then why it's been implemented into the Common Agricultural Policy currently. So the reason it's in this biodiversity strategy is because, the EU biodiversity strategy is a response to the EU's State of Nature report, 2020 State of Nature report. And that report wasn't so encouraging. This is the kind of map of the kind of most valuable habitats across the EU. These are the Natura 2000 habitats, the Habitats Directive habitats. And you can see in Ireland, most of our habitats are in a poor or bad condition. And then there's also a lot of deterioration going on. So the trends aren't great either. So a lot of Ireland is purple as well. And just in comparison to other countries, here's Ireland, and over 80% of our Natura 2000 habitats are in a poor condition. And unfortunately, agriculture is the most frequently reported pressure for habitats and species. And the reason for this is two things. There's abandonment. So at either end of the intensification scale, there's an issue. There's abandonment of grasslands. So you can imagine if a lot of the farmers in the Burren were to stop managing their kind of extensive pastures, they'd lose a lot of really species-rich habitat. And that would be an issue. That would be a loss of important habitat. And then at the other end is this intensification where you lose kind of natural grasslands and a lot of landscape features within an intensive, say, a dairying system. So these two either ends of the spectrum are what are contributing to kind of biodiversity decline. And just to give you more information on kind of species level information, this is EU birds population index from 1990 to the present day. And the graph on the left is the farmland birds, and you can see they've declined by about 30%, whereas the forest birds on the right haven't declined at all. And a similar story is for grassland butterflies, and this kind of reflects the trend for all kind of grassland pollinator species. Over the last 30 years, they've declined by about 40%. So, and this is a result of intensification of agriculture. So when the EU policymakers, the kind of ecologists are looking at this trend, they're trying to, how do we try and integrate kind of biodiversity policy into agricultural systems to mitigate these trends? And that's where they come up with this 10% area target in agriculture. So that's the background to why this is happening. And then this is why it's been integrated into the Green Deal. We haven't had kind of these integration at the Common Agricultural scale before. So it's kind of a new policy landscape that's happened recently. Teagasc have been, on the foot, ambitious about this, and they've integrated these targets already into their Signpost program. So you can see here for biodiversity, they have a target to reach 10% of high biodiversity value area per farm. So that's great, and 100% trying to do that. So we're going to try and do that at our demonstrator farm in Shinnock, and also on our 10 replicator farms. So if you were to try and implement this target, this 10% agricultural area under high diversity landscape features, you have to do some kind of habitat mapping. And the traditional way you would do habitat mapping is to employ an ecologist like myself to go out and actually do a habitat map on the farm. However, that's a very onerous task, takes a lot of time and effort. So a better way to do it would be to use kind of remote sensing technology such as satellites to map farmland habitat. The current standard, the one that's kind of available across Europe, is this Copernicus land cover map. And it's not very useful. So this is Shinnock Farm, and you can see it's just mostly agricultural land, and it picks out a few buildings. So we can't use this to measure this 10% agricultural area. under high diversity landscape features. And Ireland have not yet opted to use satellite-based ways to measure capital implementation, and it's largely because the satellites just weren't capable yet of picking up these kind of features during the last cap formation. But that's changed, and it's changing recently because of new technologies and new satellites being released. So what is possible? Well, this is what happens when I go out and actually survey Chinook on the ground. So this is the habitat map of Chinook, and you can really see all the different habitat types and the hedgerows and different forestry areas. It's just much more resolved, so you can actually measure what is the percentage area of habitat on the farm. So with Farm Zero C, what we're going to do is just take 4 or 5 different satellites available through the European Space Agency and apply machine learning techniques to try and create habitat maps, and can compare them to the on-the-ground habitat maps that we've gone out and actually mapped on the farm. So it's a kind of compare and contrast technique. What is the cost-benefit analysis to? How much would it cost to actually implement this kind of satellite-based habitat mapping system? Is it possible to use habitat maps to measure this 10% target? Is the question we're trying to answer. So that's kind of the first task within the project that I will be doing. And there is so I have said that Ireland hasn't yet opted to use satellite-based ways to measure capital implementation, but there's a revolution going on in Ireland currently around habitat mapping. So there is this national habitat map to be released soon. There's a whole working group created around this, and it's to be released in the next few months, and it looks very good. Like they're picking out improved grassland, scrub, tree lines, even semi-natural grassland within a field, and hedgerows. So this is obviously very useful. This is going to be a revolution, genuinely, in habitat mapping in Ireland. So this could serve as the baseline for what is the farm scale habitat cover. However, the issue is that it's only the reference year for this data is 2018. So what happened was the OSI employed aerial imagery, so they flew a plane around the whole country imaging it at high resolution. So we're likely to get maybe another 1 or 2 iterations of the national habitat map coming up to 2030. So we'll be able to see changes every 4 or 5 years, and is that enough to actually monitor progress towards this 10% target? Yes, but in large jumps every 5 years, every maybe 4 years. And it's going to be difficult to then react to those changes in the landscape, because you can lose and gain all the habitat quite quickly. So if we are to monitor progress towards our 10% target, it would be useful to have this satellite-based way to measure habitat cover too, which we could do that on probably an annual basis. So it would complement this national habitat map system that's been developed. So we hope that our national habitats, the satellite-based way of measuring habitats would sit along this kind of national habitat map. So once we have a habitat map of the farm, say, what do we then do to get to our 10% cover? So again, this is Chinook farm here, and we can see that over 80% of the farm is this improved agricultural grassland, as you'd expect. And again, the kind of method that you would employ when you're trying to get to a 10% cover is that an ecologist goes out, maps the farm, and then makes specific recommendations to that farmer on how to get to 10% based on that specific farm. However, again, that's a very onerous process. It takes a lot of time to employ a lot of people to do that. So what I'm wondering is that can we automate that system? Can we build it wouldn't be a fully automated system, but can we automate some of the recommendations that you create when you have a habitat map of the farm? So I just want to run through some of the recommendations that I've created for Chinook farm, and then comment on how easy it would be to automate that. So the total habitat on the farm is this 9%. There's our 10% target, that red line. So the total habitat is around 9%, and the total natural habitat is around 7%. Now, the difference between those two figures is that we have this conifer woodland and Sitka tree line on the farm. And just to show you an image here, that's the Sitka tree line. And these kind of conifer woodlands are very easy to pick out using satellite imagery. The kind of coniferous leaves, you can pick them out very easily using infrared satellite imagery. So if we detect, these kind of non-native species on dairy farms, it could be an easy automated recommendation to, okay, when those trees, when you either cut them down or they fall over naturally, replace them with natural forest, and then that can be included in your high diversity landscape feature cover. So that will count toward the 10% target. So that's pretty easily automatable recommendation. And then there's the natural grassland category, so 0.4% currently on the farm. And a lot of the farm has these kind of mown lawn areas. So in front of the parlour, you see Alejandro here standing on the mown lawn. And if we can detect these lawn areas using the national habitat map images, again, that's a pretty easily automatable recommendation, is to allow some of that mown lawn area to become some kind of natural wildflower meadow, or just let it grow into semi-natural grassland. And again, you're not compromising on production of the dairy farm specifically. So all these measures so far are not compromising on the dairy system. So you try and look for win-win scenarios. So again, this is, if we can detect these mown lawn areas, we should be able to, it's an easily automatable recommendation, create some semi-natural grassland there. And similarly with hedgerows. So hedgerows are the dominant habitat in the farm, 3.41% of the whole farm. And this is a nice hedgerow on Shinag Farm. But again, if you want to increase the habitat cover to that 10% target, a thing you could do is pull the fence out 2 meters on all the south-facing hedges, say. And by doing that, so we can measure all the hedgerows, obviously, we map them. So we just pull out the hedge 2 meters to allow this grassland to grow. And you can measure the area size of that. And that would increase the amount of grassland, natural grassland that we have. And then that will increase the total habitat area. And we might yet have got to our 10% cover. And so one last thing that we could do is look for pastures. If we do need to convert over a pasture, if this is the worst case scenario, but if we do have to convert over a pasture to some kind of natural habitat cover, what we do is look for the least productive pasture that exists on the farm. So in Shannock, this pasture down here in the bottom left is kind of a parkland landscape. There's a lot of trees growing in it already, and it's also at the bottom of a hill, so it's constantly reverting back to kind of scrubby vegetation. And the farm manager told me the cattle don't really like grazing in there, and they only graze in there maybe, they graze out very quickly. So it's the least productive field in the whole farm. And again, we can probably detect that using satellite imagery, using some kind of NDVI index. So if we had to, that'd be a recommendation we could make. If you had to convert some pasture over to over to natural habitat, that could be the pasture you go for. And that would get us up to our 10% target. So the idea is, can we take a lot of effort? Can we take a lot of the kind of man hours that would be required to implement this target? Can we automate a lot of that? We use the satellite-based system to measure habitat, and similarly, can we build an automated recommendation system to help farmers get to that 10% target and meet that EU Green Deal ambition? And there's a whole piece about monitoring progress there. So we could use kind of images to monitor progress, like farmers take images of the bits of land that they've converted over to make sure that actually has happened. So that's a summary. There's a huge amount of EU policy moving at the moment because of this EU Green Deal. That's been translated into Irish policy. In response to that, Farm GRC is creating this satellite-based farmland mapping system. We're going to trial it. We're going to test how useful it is in an Irish context. And similarly, once we have, we then automate a bit of that recommendation system to take a lot of the kind of donkey work out of trying to reach that target. So, any questions? I'll be happy to take.
Thank you very much, Cian. You give it a very good context to the whole project as well, because as we know, yes, there are, I suppose we are in a biodiversity emergency, as has been described, and climate emergency. So these responses are really important. Just if I could start with you, Cian, and maybe Gavin, if you could join us also. Maybe I did switch off your video, Gavin, so might have been having problems accessing it there. And Pat, will you get Pat back as well, just to make sure that we have everybody. So Cian, yes, just in terms of the habitat quality, I didn't see mention of that in your presentation. It is largely a quantitative assessment of habitat. Surely there are differences there between a tree line of Sitka or conifers versus native woodland, or and just to follow on to that, then is there any difference in terms of having a cluster of habitat as opposed to little different pieces of habitat scattered around a farm?
Yeah, so good question. So the Sitka tree line would be just a different habitat, really. That wouldn't count towards the high diversity landscape feature. So that doesn't really come into the quality of a habitat so much. It's just a different habitat category, really. So if you talk about habitat quality, you could be talking about a hedgerows with lots of different, a hedgerow with 2 meters high with a lot of and it's full with different layers to it. So it's got the grassland layer, it's got the scrub layer, maybe some trees too. That's a high quality hedgerow versus one with many gaps in it and doesn't have those layers of vegetation. So that is something that we're absolutely looking at. The quality of a hedgerow of all habitats matters massively. We are going to try. There's a whole piece on habitat quality. I didn't talk about it there. We're going to try and measure, habitat quality as much as we can, again, remotely. Is there measures that we can correlate, some satellite-based measures that correlate with habitat quality? You would guess that a lot of measures would correlate with just kind of the size and age of a hedgerow. So if that hedgehow's been there a long time, it's going to be more biodiverse than one that's been just there recently. And if it's wider, that's going to be a good indicator of quality too, compared to a much thinner hedgerow. So these are some measures that we can measure remotely. We won't be able to get down to species level just using remote measures, but it's possible that, and this is something that I would love to really look into, if we have a system where a farmer can take a picture of a hedgerow and then upload that to a system, can we use some kind of analysis to look at the various different hedgerow that are shown in that picture to have some kind of quality assessment coming out of that? So that's something that's in the project we're going to look at, and there's possibility that down the road, like the new iPhone has this LiDAR assessment on it. They have a LiDAR measure on it, so you could go and a farmer could walk down a hedgerow and take a 3D kind of image using this LiDAR of a hedgerow. And that's a huge amount of information contained in that that we could analyze and get quality metrics out of. So I think I want to look at that in terms definitely for the habitat quality of hedgerows, because they're such a dominant feature in the Irish landscape. Whether that'll be useful for other types of habitat quality measures, I'm not sure. You have a different habitat quality scorecard for your hedgerow versus your semi-natural grassland versus your earth bank. So these are all questions that we're looking into, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Cian. And just Gavin, you spoke about the carbon side of the equation, and we had David Stiles speaking to us last week about the carbon emissions from agriculture. He boiled it down to a very simple equation. He was talking about, well, look, we can reduce emissions by increased efficiency or reducing the total output, be it by cow numbers. But he also talked about the sequestration side of the equation. Then, could you tell us a little bit more about how the offsetting or that offsetting of the emissions will take place on the Chinook farm?
Yeah, Mark. I suppose it's soil carbon sequestration is, I suppose, a widely talked about topic at the moment. It's quite difficult to measure it. So what we're doing with Chinook, we're trying to reduce our emissions as much as possible. And then we're looking to offset through soil carbon sequestration, and looking to displace as well using the grassland biorefinery. So we're not exactly sure how much we can displace using the soil carbon sequestration. That's just unknown at the moment. It could vary. I've seen Teagasc figures of 500 kgs of carbon per hectare. I've seen it over a ton. It could even be less. Is it a source? Is it a sink? It's quite difficult to know at the moment, but that's what we're basically looking into at the moment.
And are you factoring that into your projections around?
Correct. Yes. So we're factoring in order to displace it and to get the climate neutrality by 2027. We're going to have to look at soil carbon sequestration. Yes.
Okay. So I'm just looking at that graph you have there. So 2027, you're looking at neutrality there. So the emissions then, could you just remind me what those emissions will be offset by then?
What would those emissions be offset by?
what will be the emissions from the farm? What will be the key offsets then for any residual emissions from the farm?
It will be soil carbon sequestration and the use of the Grassland biorefinery to displace soil production.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm conscious we have a lot of questions coming in here, a lot of interest in this particular project. So, Pat, we probably should skip straight to the questions.
Yeah, no, I suppose that one of the key questions coming in relates to the methane element, and a comment kind of indicating that you haven't given a vision as to how you're going to pull down that or mitigate that piece.
Yeah, I suppose that's the biggest challenge for livestock systems. I mentioned in my presentation that we're looking at methane reducing additives. So Lawrence Shallew's part of the project as well. So he's currently doing trials. There's some very promising methane additives out there. I know there's Asparagopsis, the red seaweed, is probably the most interesting out there. They're seeing reductions of up to 80 to 90% in indoor systems abroad. So the likes of New Zealand, Australia, America. So there's trials being carried out on that. So we're hoping to get a trial up and running with Lawrence Shallew and more park to look at that in a grass-based system. So there is quite promising out, like, as I said, 80 to 90% reduction. There's also Trinop, which is a DSM product. They're seeing reductions of about 30 to 40%. But look, it is a challenge. It is a massive challenge. It's over half our carbon footprint. So that's what I would say. The biggest challenge for reducing our carbon footprint will be methane, yes.
Question here, a very practical one. Is Chinook Farm a profit-making farm at the moment, and will it continue to be profit-making as you head to net carbon zero in 2027? And what economic challenges do you expect in getting to carbon zero?
Yeah, I think I have a farming background, so I think we need to be very practical. Like, we want to create an economically viable climate neutral, so it needs to be economically viable. There will be challenges, definitely. Chinook is a very, very profitable farm, which is a credit to Kevin Ahern and Al Murphy, the management staff. About common profit per hectare is about €2,500 per hectare, so extremely profitable. There will be a lot of challenges going forward, but we'll say the likes of, I think cost will be like, what would be the cost of a methane reducing additive? Will it be, how expensive would these, or would say your slurry amendments and all this technology? That would definitely factor into it, but we will be looking at the economic side, and we're creating a business plan or farm innovation blueprint to look at that.
Question for Cian in relation to the I suppose the impact of the habitats, as well as just the habitats being there. Is there any measuring planned in relation to impact on pollinators, other species, birds? And I suppose the other part of that question relates to the I suppose the ensuring that there is food for particularly pollinators right throughout the year, which is something that Jane Stout kind of dealt with us as a hugely important issue when she had a webinar earlier.
Yeah, so I have done kind of species level assessments of all the habitats on Chinook Farm. That's not particularly a part of the project. We're not going to look at all the species, at all the habitats and all the farms we're looking at. We're more concerned about this habitat level assessment, given that this target is coming in from the EU level. We want to create a system that can measure that, and then how you get to that 10% target if you implement that. If you have a diversity of habitats on your farm, so that will be correlated with whether you have lots of different habitat groups and species diversity on the farm too. So your hedgerows will have a specific community, grassland, semi-natural grassland areas. So you could infer some species level populations from the habitat richness and diversity on the farm. Okay,
and I suppose the other part of that, is there any thought in terms of the continuity of habitats across the landscape?
Yeah, sorry, and Mark actually asked me that. So part of this system that we would like to build, a recommendation system, is obviously like a forestry, natural forestry beside other already there forest. So if you have some ancient forest on the farm, it'd be great to add on to that with some other forestry. So there's these kind of like ecological conservation principles that you would integrate into that assessment system, recommendation system, that would get your most bang for your buck from a biodiversity perspective, in terms of creating more species richness in the landscape and reduce those declines. I would also like to look at a higher level of the farm than the farm scale at the whole landscape. That's not specifically written into the project, but it might be something we look at. But at the moment, we're going to focus at the farm scale.
Okay, there's quite for Gavin. There's quite a few questions in relation to technologies, anaerobic digestion, photo PV, and a potential role, and also a good few questions around the use of the grass and the grass protein from biorefinery.
Yeah, so we have a renewable plan in place. So there was a windmill installed on the farm in 2011. We are looking to install solar PV as well. So that will be installed in the coming year. That will all tie into place and looking to reduce our carbon or CO2 emissions. It's a small fraction of our overall emissions, but we still need to reduce it. Looking at the grassland biorefinery, I know James Gaffey from NTU is doing a presentation on it next week. So I won't go into too much detail. So what it basically is, you put grass into this grass biorefinery. It looks basically like grass has gone for silage. It's gone strong. You put it in, you get a liquid fraction, and you also get a solid fraction, which basically looks like lawn cuttings. That solid fraction, there was trials done in UCD in the Rusitech machine. So they saw a 10 to 15% reduction in that compared to grass silage. They also did trials in milking cows. So they did grass silage, grass protein or the whey fraction, or the press cake, sorry, and concentrate, and then just comparing that to grass silage and concentrate. So they saw very, very little difference in milk yield. So that was quite promising. And I know there's more trials going on in that with methane in Moore Park as well in the coming year. So that's quite interesting. And what you're getting from that as well, you're getting the liquid fraction, and that's driving to a protein concentrate, which is looking to displace soya production. So James will go into this in more detail next week, but there was basically a trial done on that last year in Barrow on a pig farm. So basically it was used as part of the diet to displace soya, and looked at finishers, and there was very little difference in growth rates in that trial. But there'll be more trials happening as well on it, but it's very promising.
Okay, there's a question in relation to reseeding for clover and multi-species sward, and what is your plan at this point? You have a 10% multi-species sward, you have significant clover, I think you said, in a lot of the rest of the pasture. What's your view going forward, I suppose, of the relative merits between a clover sward and a multi-species sward?
Yeah, I suppose 10% of the farm is already in the multi-species mix, which is chicory, plantain, perennial ryegrass and clover. The aim is to get the majority of the farm. Ideally, we want 100% farm with clover in the sward, but our target is 75%, but the more the better, basically. So we want to reduce our chemical in to about 150 kgs per hectare. It's going to be quite challenging, as I suppose anybody that's tried clover before, it's not easy. So we're basically looking to include clover in a full reseed, but we're also looking to oversow pallets as well. So anybody familiar with it, basically you can't oversow the whole farm in 1 year, because just the management practices, grazing tight and trying to get into the cover of 1,000, maybe 1,100, and reducing chemical in to give the clover a chance. So the plan over next year is to include in the full reseed and to oversow, and we will be sowing more multi-species as well.
Gavin, can I ask you a question just in relation to sort of the scaling of this, the different aspects of this farm, if we're to scale it to a national level? What sort of supports do you think would be needed there to support farmers implementing these types of measures at a farm level, so that we can actually try and, because there's so much good stuff happening here on the farm here in Shinnock?
Yeah, I suppose the first step really, Mark, is to show that it works on farm, and which we're doing. So I suppose just funding research, I think there's absolutely some fantastic work going on in Moore Park as well, with reducing methane is our biggest challenge. I think funding just to get that research up and going and to prove it is the most important thing. I suppose going to the farm level, then I suppose something like the Signpost Series, the Signpost Farmers, I think more funding towards that is fantastic. Carberry have their Joy program, which has been running for the last number of years and run by John McNamara. So we're liaising and working with those farmers very closely. We have 10 monitor farms, so we would call them our replicator farms as well. So we're keeping them very close to the project. And so I think for farmers, and coming from a farming background, I think if they can see it's working, I think investment in that, if they can see it's working on farm level, and demonstration farms in Shannock, I think that's yes, the way forward in my belief. But I suppose, as Cian was mentioning with the biodiversity and increase of biodiversity, like we are in a biodiversity crisis. I suppose increased payments and I suppose you might elaborate on that as well, Cian, with policy and.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, so when you talk to farmers on the ground, one of the really perverse policies kind of on the ground is that when a farmer converts a bit of land over to some biodiversity from a productive pastures, that they lose basic farm payment. So that's you're penalising farmers to get to that 10% at the moment. With the current CAP reform, there is a chance for Ireland to pay farmers. There's a in the eco schemes, there's a policy that you can pay farmers to have natural habitat on the farm. So I'd love to see a policy where, if to get that 10% target, you pay for that that biodiversity land. So you convert whatever land is converted over from the basic farm payments, from the productive land to the biodiversity land. You don't lose out in the basic farm payment, or even you're maybe paid a little bit more than the basic farm payment for that biodiversity land. So that would really get rid of the kind of perverse policy incentives at the moment, and I think would lead to a lot more uptake of this 10% target.
Could I just ask Gavin there? I've met some farmers over the years, and they feel they're the ones that are becoming the endangered species at times. Are you looking at the sort of broader sustainability aspects of the farm in terms of the social sustainability? I mean, is it going to be practical for a one or two person operation to implement all of these measures? And what are the impacts of this? Like the zero in 2027, what will the profitability of the farm look like? Given, okay, efficiency is going to bring us so far, but then there are going to be other measures. Then I presume you're looking at the value streams coming from those other aspects that you've talked about. But I'm just interested in the kind of the social sustainability and even boiling it down to farmer well-being and so forth.
Yeah, it does. Look, I suppose that's why we're taking a holistic approach, looking at it, and it does need to be, and I suppose we need to stay grounded. This needs to be practical. It's no point going down a very expensive route or going down something that's not practical, because it needs to be implemented by farmers and farmers on the ground. I suppose just look at the social sustainability side of it. Like Shannock Farm is it's a very, very well-run farm. Just from like a labour point of view, there's no point going into too much. We don't want to draw too much work on farmers either. And I suppose we'll be demonstrating this as we go forward as well. The holistic approach is looking at biodiversity, it's looking at water quality, it's looking at air quality, and I suppose stuff like labour is going to be factored into. But it does, I suppose at the end of the day, it needs to support farm families basically.
But the farm itself is managed by a team, is that right? It's
correct. So there's two full-time labourers, Kevin Ahern and Alan Murphy.
Okay, very good. I won't interject too much more, because I know there's lots of questions coming through here, so we've only a few minutes left. So
I suppose a question there in relation to trying to our actions to try and reduce losses of nitrogen to water. Is there anything going on in the farm to try and minimize losses?
Yeah, so we're at the early stages of this. I suppose we're working very closely with Aoife Feeney Carby, who's asset advisor. So she did an asset assessment on the farm, and those she basically created an asset report, and those actions were taken on board and they were delivered. I suppose very, very practical things as well. There is a weather station above in Shannock, so there's that gives us soil temperatures. Just simple stuff like look at the soil temperature of that station, not spreading fertilizer when the grass isn't growing. Look at the soil temperature, look at the forecast. We're looking at low emission slurry spreading. We're looking to reduce our chemical in as well. There will be, as part of the signpost, so, just to say that Shannock is also a signpost farm. So as part of that, they're doing a law pro study as well. So we're looking at areas. This will give us a more in-depth analysis, and we'll be able to see where the possible areas are a risk of runoff. And so I think Cian, we were kind of chatting about that actually last week about that, and maybe possibly looking into that more. I suppose we're at the very early stages, but looking into more, maybe planting or pulling out the hedgerows a bit more in those areas, and after looking at that study.
Yeah, just comment on that briefly. For phosphorus runoff, you can use these kind of habitat features to try and mitigate, can close the gaps, the kind of runoff areas. For nitrogen, it's harder because it goes out into groundwater. But we will be using like the pollution impact potential maps that EP produced, and we actually might try and model those at a farm scale to give more actual insights to farmers, particularly around using hedgerows or other landscape features to mitigate runoff for phosphorus. Nitrogen is much more about kind of source reduction than trying to actually trap it in kind of habitats.
There's a question here saying you've at this stage had quite a number of farmers coming in around the place and talking to them, and just to try and get a sense of some of the technologies and issues that they seem to be willing to go with, or that they're pushing back against, and some insight into that maybe, Gavin.
Yeah, look, I suppose we're at the very, very early stages of the project. I think there has been a lot of farmers out, and there's been a lot of discussion groups out. I think the general consensus, it's very, very positive. Farmers are willing to change. They're willing to adapt this technology. They just want to see it in place. And again, as I said, it needs to be practical. And I suppose we need to keep that in the back of our mind. I suppose, again, I'm from a farming background, and I always think in the back of my head, if I couldn't take this back to my own farm or my uncle's farm, it's not going to work. So I think they've been very positive to all of them. Obviously, there's going to be a small bit of feedback and questions on some of the aspects, but as a general overview, it's quite positive.
From when I was out on the replicator farm, slurry spreading was a very popular technology. Also, there was some issue around clover management, and there was a lot of interest in Clove Max, I think his name was, that the pesticide, the herbicide that doesn't impact clover, and if that could be integrated more into the farming system, what was unavailable, that affected a lot of clover management strategies. So I think that would be useful to have more available, and that would increase a lot of the clover uptake, because there's a concern around clover management at the moment.
There's a question in here, kind of alluding to an impression there that the pressure is coming entirely on farmers to resolve this issue, and to what extent are others within the value chain doing their bit, and how is that being reflected in this project and other things that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I suppose this is it's a farming project, it's an agricultural project. I suppose just looking to Carberry as well, like they're in the value added chain. They're looking to reduce their emissions as well, so they have a plan in place on that. But I suppose I can't really comment for anybody else. We're looking at the agricultural side. I do agree. Sometimes farmers do get the brunt of it, which is unfair.
Yeah, I would love to see.
Sorry, just a question in relation to the ammonia side of things, because that is another big issue for Ireland. We have serious risk of overshooting our targets in relation to ammonia, and obviously agriculture is one of the main sources of ammonia emissions. Have you measures in place to address that, or do you see a zero ammonia situation arising on the farmers? Is that a target within the project?
It's we're looking to reduce ammonia emissions. It's quite difficult to monitor ammonia emissions on an individual farm basis. So simple technologies like, I suppose, protected urea compared to standard urea. So protected urea has a lower ammonia emission factor as well. Low emission slurry spreading, less ammonia off that as well. And we're looking at, I suppose, we have a trial in place this year that's looking at reducing methane from stored slurry. So we're also possibly looking at the potential to measure the ammonia emissions off that as well, and see if we could reduce that. But we are reducing our ammonia emissions, but that we'll have to look into further in the future as well.
Because there is, I know there's always a risk when we look at all of the key areas of soil quality, water quality, climate, that there's a risk of pollution swapping, that you'll chase after one particular target and the others suffer as a result. In terms of water quality, what sort of measures are you implementing on the farm? Or is that part?
Yeah, I suppose I've probably mentioned a couple of those, just like some very, very simple practical things that Keane mentioned as well, about your hedgerows and spreading fertilizer, a small bit of common sense, looking at the weather station, if you would say that. I suppose monitoring water quality in the farm, we're looking at that as well. It's quite difficult to measure water quality on the farm, so we're looking at the possibility of lysimeters, possibility of suction cups, but we just need to be practical as well. But
yeah, sorry, no, I'd missed that. No, apologies if you had covered that already. Okay, pass.
A question in relation to I suppose two elements of soil. One is your overall soil fertility and the stats in relation to where your soil fertility is at, and the second one in relation to the measurement of the organic matter in your soils. Where are they at, and where do you hope to get them to over a period?
Yeah, I suppose that's managed by John McNamara and Gavin Hunt, so I don't actually have those figures, but the soil fertility status is quite good in the farm, but I don't have the exact figures behind it. Looking at that as well, the soil organic matter, we don't have a target, we have a baseline. What those figures are off the top of my head, I don't know. But we'll be looking to, the plan is to measure, looking at soil carbon over the next couple of years. We're doing the 0 to 10 to 20, 20 to 30 centimeters sampling for carbon over the next couple of years. But what the baseline is exactly, I don't have those figures off the top of my head, unfortunately.
And other than, I suppose, in the system, as you move towards more carbon neutrality, there's certain costs are increasing, like dramatic increases in fertilizer costs at the moment. Is the overall objective to reduce, maintain, or see slight increases in the cost of production of milk? Is it a kind of a win-win that by moving towards a net zero that you will actually reduce the cost of production, or is it going to cost to do that?
Yeah, I suppose we looked at some of this, and some of the practice that you can take on will save money, like clover. If you can incorporate clover into the sward and have an average of 25 to 27% over the year, you're going to reduce your nitrogen bill, and you also see an increase in milk solids. So something like that is going to increase low emission slurry spreading, gaining about an extra 3 units of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. That's going to reduce your costs. So there's a couple of those, like I know the multi-species sward as well, we're seeing significantly less fertilizer going onto those as well. So that's all, and with similar tons of dry matter. So that's all going to reduce our costs going forward. Obviously, there's going to be a couple of more costs associated as well, but overall, we do want to reduce costs and keep, as I said, it needs to be economically viable for farmers.
We will be creating this innovation blueprint. We'll be able to compare and contrast all the different measures that you would potentially implement on your farm and see what the cost and benefit of each, and in combination of all those measures. So you should be able to compare, if you want to implement anything on your farm, what would be the cost?
Okay. Maybe a final question for Cian. Are you tracking soil health and soil biodiversity in any way?
Not specifically. We'll be just measuring the kind of carbon sequestration in soil on the baselines. We won't be doing like soil biodiversity samples or anything. We might look at, in multi-species swards, you expect to have kind of more soil biodiversity than in your conventional swards. We might look at that. It's not written into the work package, but it'd be something I'd be interested in regardless. But we're not specifically looking at that in this project.
Okay. I finish with a comment there. There's a comment, well done to all involved in this morning's presentation. It's heartening to see 2 young people coming up with realistic concrete solutions to our biodiversity situation. So I think, and a number of comments of that kind.
Yeah, just want to echo that. It's great to see, that this level of detail going into the work. Look, it acknowledges that there's work to be done in agriculture, but people are taking it seriously. So well done to both of you for getting stuck into this project. Just before we leave you, I just want to share details with you of Bioeconomy Ireland Week next week. It runs from the 18th to the 24th of October. And so if you don't know a lot about the bioeconomy, maybe you'd like to log into a few of the events, you can go to irishbioeconomy.ucd.ie, where you can learn more from Bioeconomy Ireland there. So I do encourage you to check out some of the events and the presentations that are going to be happening next week. And next week, we're going to be actually, as part of Bioeconomy Week, we will have a presentation looking at the bioeconomy. We're going to have James Gaffey from MTU. We're going to have, who else are we having? At all the names there.
Johan Sanders.
Johan Sanders, that's right. And we had Xavier Dubuisson, all speaking about biorefinery glass and the potential of bioeconomy to transform grassland agriculture in Ireland. So that's next Friday at 9:30. So again, thanks to Cian and Gavin for joining us this morning. Really enjoy your presentation. And the presentation will be available on the Teagasc website in the next coming days. And final thanks to Vaughan Maher in the background, helping us with production and today's episode, and also Andy Boland, our series producer as well. So until next week, have a good weekend, and we'll chat to you next week. Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.